everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Nicola Pogson. I'm Director of Alumni Relations. And I have to say, we're absolutely delighted to have you all here today. We've been working hard with the Working Party to pull together this event, so it's wonderful to have you here. And I'm going to ask Professor Jonathan Weeban to come and to the stage and welcome you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicola. Thank you, Nicola. Well, Dame Claire, Professor Akroth, President, Sir Philip, alumni of Westminster Hospital Medical School and Westminster Hospital, welcome to Imperial College. This is a historic 300th anniversary of Westminster Hospital. Now, as I think this audience knows extremely well, the majority of the ancient teaching hospitals in London and medical schools are Victorian in origin. Two are truly ancient, 12th century origin, Barts and Tommys, and three have their origins in the 18th century. St. George's, Guy's, and of course Westminster, that we're going to celebrate today and tomorrow. And although the Westminster Hospital Medical School was only founded later in 1834, there is, as you've read in the history that Paul Akroth has pulled together, there were medical students or cubs at the Westminster Hospital from the early 1730s onwards. So I think I can say we're also happy to celebrate very nearly 300 years of medical education at the Westminster Hospital also today. Now, this audience of alumni will be more conscious than any of the changing nature of London medical schools over the past 30 years. And it's not always a happy tale. There were initially changes brought about by demographic shifts in populations. And the move of the hospitals followed by immediately the move of their medical schools. So the first was Charing Cross, which moved from its home on the Strand or Covent Garden to Fulham Palace Road, 1973. And then George's in 76 with a far more dramatic move because it moved south of the river. The only organization to sort of change from north to south or south to north that I'm aware of in medical history in London. And this move obviously to Tooting Broadway. And then there followed a period of amalgamation in London, which followed the Todd Report of 1968, which addressed the situation of these 12 medical schools and reached the conclusion that each on their own was too small, too isolated, too separated from the large universities in London, and also noted their rather highly combative and competitive nature, which was felt to be leading that the whole was less than the sum of its parts. And as a result of that, there were a series of mergers, which this audience will be only too familiar with. Because the Westminster was the first to merged with Charing Cross in 1984. Mary's then merged with Imperial in 1988. And the whole lot came together in West London, bringing the two undergraduate medical schools, former Westminster at Charing Cross, St Mary's, with the postgraduate institutions, Royal Postgraduate Medical School at the Hammersmith and the National Heart and Lung Institute at the Brompton, which came together to join Imperial in 1997 and form what's now the Faculty of Medicine and the Imperial College School of Medicine. So similar things were happening across North London at UCL. Middlesex merged with UCL in 87, and Royal Free came in 1998. In East London, Barts and London both merged with Queen Mary University of London in 95. And south of the river, Guy's and Tommy's merged in 82 to form what was the United Hospitals Medical School. And then finally, and the last merger was with King's College in 1998. So only St George's ploughs its own independent furrow down in Tooting, unattached still after a sort of unconsummated relationship with the University of Surrey and continuing flirtations from King's College. It sits alone. So there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that the mergers dramatically improved the quality of the medical science and the impact of that science that came out of the medical schools. And if we look at both the quality and the quantity of international standard biomedical research in the period following the mergers with the main universities, there is just no doubt that we now pack a more significant punch in research across London than we did previously. So the mergers have really facilitated interdisciplinary working, and even contributed to a degree to a somewhat less combative approach across London between these organizations, although, as I suspect you can imagine, that still has a bit of a way to go. So the position of medical education and the MBBS student, I think, is far more nuanced as a result of these mergers. The most immediate effect was a loss of intimacy. So the majority of the pre-merger medical schools were of the order of 100 students, some, Westminster, even smaller than that. And we've moved instead to cohorts of 350 or larger. And indeed, with our 6-year course with its integrated BSc year, at Imperial at any one time, we have about 2,100 MBBS undergraduate medical students on the books. So there is inevitably some loss of identity for our medical students within the anonymity of these much larger organizations. And this is to a degree cemented by the sort of clubbability of medical students, and still here expressed by a strong medical school ethos around Charing Cross and the Bar and the Reynolds building. And of course, our medical students are different from the other students attending undergraduate across the other faculties of Imperial. They're here for 6 years rather than 3. They mostly work 48-hour weeks, 48-week years and 8-hour days, and they're quite spread out from the first year onwards across the hospitals of West London, rather than being so focused here at South Kensington. So the upside for our students is that we have an extremely strong ethos of research-led medical education. So the aim of the medical school is to produce doctors who retain a lifelong spirit of inquiry, a really solid understanding of the research base of medicine, and who are entrepreneurial, which is also a very strong feature of Imperial College. We hope, and we hope that we do, train doctors who are able to adapt flexibly and effectively to whatever the next 40 years of their lives is going to throw at them. So since I was appointed Dean of the Faculty of Medicine last year, I've worked extensively with Martin Lupton, who is the head of our medical school, with 2 key objectives. The first was to establish our new curriculum with its emphasis on problem-based learning and team-based working, moving away from the very fact-based pedagogy, which we all remember with various degrees of fondness from our own medical school days. So now and into the future, when facts are so readily available to us on our phones, it's the analysis and the interpretation of that information, the ability to work as part of a team, and the effective and compassionate interface with our patients and colleagues, which are going to be so important to impart lifelong skills. And secondly, I'm extremely conscious of our history and the power, as it were, of the names of the old origins of our medical schools. So my career has been here at Imperial College since our first appointment in 1991, but I spent most of my working life at St. Mary's. I don't want to lose the names and the power of these names, of these well-known, internationally known hospitals, of which the medical school is the sort of latest incarnation. So we intend to address the issues of patient experience, which I mentioned, and in close consultation with our cohort of students at the moment, we intend to support an evolution to a house-based system within the medical school, where we start splitting the year into groups of approximately 100, 120, for the duration of their 6 years. And I don't think you need to go very far to think what the names of the 3 houses will be. Charing Cross, St Mary's, and Westminster. And I really look forward to working with Martin, with the medical school, and with the students, and with the alumni, to really deliver this in a way which we cherish these names, which have been so well known for so long, while still retaining the ethos of belonging to a single university, that is Imperial College. So I'd now like to welcome to the stage Professor Paul Aycroft, who was an alumnus of Westminster Hospital Medical School, 1959, and who has taken the lead with a small committee in order to plan for today's Tercentenary celebration. Paul then served as a consultant orthopedic surgeon at Westminster Hospital, then at Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, and the Wellington, specializing in disorders of the knee. He's past president of the British Association of Surgery for the Knee, and became an honorary member of the Arthroscopy Association of North America in 2004. And I welcome you now to give your address. Thank you very much.
Westminster Hospital alumnus wish to thank you, Professor Johnson, and also President Alice Garst, for inviting us here to Imperial College. Thank you, Dean, for these words of welcome, for which the hospital and the school are very grateful indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, Dame Claire Marx is a remarkable lady. Her medical education started at University College Medical School and led eventually to the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston with an arthroplasty scholarship. We first met when she applied for an orthopedic registrar post. Successful. And we've become great friends and have been ever since. Later, she was appointed consultant orthopedic surgeon at St Mary's, and later still, director of orthopedics, trauma, and rheumatology at Ipswich Hospital, near her marital home in Suffolk. She rapidly rose through British Orthopedic Association posts to become president of the BOA in 2008. Then through similar posts at the Royal College of Surgeons, and then its president, the first lady president ever of the College of Surgeons in 2014. And now, this year, the only ever lady chair at the GMC, the General Medical Council. Well, what a CV. And to top it all, recently, Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire for services to medicine. Ladies and gentlemen, Dame Claire Lucy Marx.
I'm just going to make sure the mic's working. Can you all hear me at the back? So, no? So, President, Dean, honoured guests and alumni, it's a real pleasure to be here this afternoon as we mark 300 years of the Westminster Hospital. My relationship with the hospital, as you heard from Paul, started in 1981, but I'm going to talk about that a little later. But I know that the knowledge and skill I developed there and the friendships and support of those with whom I shared those very happy years transformed my life and acted as a platform from which I could spring into my future career, which you've heard about. I have to say, I am happy to count myself as having been a Westminster girl. So, as you've heard, I recently became chair of another institution of some history. I'm not sure that people feel quite as fondly of the GMC as they quite clearly feel about the Westminster, but the two institutions do have some common ground. They are both there to ensure that patients are treated safely, to the highest possible standards, and to ensure that the public have confidence in them to act in the patient's best interests. This afternoon, I want to briefly cover a little history relating to the Westminster, to the GMC, and to women in their struggle to be recognised as members of the profession. I will also say something about my relationship with Westminster and my personal journey as a clinical leader. And I hope to convince you that for this and any other institution to survive in this radically changing world, investing in clinical leadership will be essential. I would also like to take the opportunity briefly to tell you how I see the role of a regulator like the GMC in developing leaders of medicine and surgery. So my text today comes from the American social worker, philosopher, and pioneer, Mary Parker Follett, who, writing in 1924, said, "Leadership is not defined by the exercise of power, but by the capacity to increase the sense of power amongst those led. The most essential work of the leader is to create more leaders." So first, some shared history. In preparing this talk, we've had some fun, and the team in my office were sent away and actually looked up what was happening in 1858, the year of the founding of the General Medical Council, or as it was known then, it was the General Council for Medical Education and Registration. And they first met in November 1858. At that time, the Westminster Hospital was situated on Broad Sanctuary, which is now the site occupied by the Queen Elizabeth II Conference Centre, and it's just across the road from Westminster Abbey. And interestingly enough, that is the site where my husband and I actually were married and had our wedding reception 30 years ago this year. So it's a wonderful site. At that time, it was the summer of something called the Great Stink. And this was the smell of sewage which came from the Thames, and it had become unbearable. At the time, the miasma, which was the name for bad air, was thought to spread diseases such as cholera, and outbreaks of that were very common. So a bill was passed in the autumn to create a modern sewage system for the city, proposed by someone whose name will be familiar to you, Sir Joseph Bazalgette. And that network of sewerage still continues to the day, and it is, of course, under the embankment. So this period was a very exciting period in medicine. It marked the dawn of anaesthesia. John Snow's On Narcotism by Inhalation of Vapours had been published 10 years earlier, and although first administered at St George's, the use of ether spread quickly to hospitals such as the Westminster by 1858. In 1858, I find it is amazing to think that we were still 37 years from the discovery of X-ray, 49 years from the discovery of the first antibiotic, and of course, 90 years from the foundation of the National Health Service. So much has changed in medicine and society since 1858, but the General Medical Council's purpose would still be recognisable to one of our founding members. We protect the public to ensure good standards of medical education and practice. Or, as it was said back then, persons requiring medical aid should be enabled to distinguish between qualified or unqualified practitioners. So I greatly enjoyed Paul Across' History of the Westminster Hospital, as well as the research by Steve Laws on the women in medicine and the role of the Westminster hospitals in that long struggle for women to have the right to be doctors. And I want to reflect on that a little further. When the General Medical Council was founded in 1858, only those with a medical degree could be listed on the medical register, and only those on the medical register were legally permitted to offer medical care. However, women in Britain could not find a single university or medical school which would allow them to attend. And even if they could, there were no examining bodies that would admit them for medical examinations needed to qualify for the profession as a doctor. In this period, there was intense debate regarding the admission of women to medical schools, and indeed the medical register. This culminated in the passing of an Act of Parliament in 1876, which gave all medical examining bodies the power to admit women as candidates, subject to the same conditions and requirements as men. Although the struggle for equality continued for decades afterwards, it was a really important moment in the path to change, both for the GMC and the Westminster Hospital, as they are part of this story. So this year is 150 years since the inspiring female leader, Sophia Jex-Blake, sought permission from the Dean of the Medical Faculty of Edinburgh University to attend medical lectures. In that same year, the first 7 women matriculated at Edinburgh. The Edinburgh 7, as they were known, were taught separately, charged higher fees, and graded lower. Hostility to their presidents led to riots. At the anatomy exams, several hundred male students pelted the women with mud and other objects as they arrived. During the examination, the rioters shoved a live sheep into the examination hall, and this caused further chaos. 4 years after matriculation, Edinburgh University ended up rejecting them. But the fight for the right to train as a doctor gained widespread public and political attention. These tensions and ructions were played out at the General Medical Council and no doubt at the Westminster Hospital and Medical School too. Following the expulsion from Edinburgh University, Sophia Jex-Blake played an instrumental role in setting up the London School of Medicine for Women in 1874 to train women. The General Medical Council, and at that time it was comprised of 24 men, spent 3 of its 6 days during which they sat in 1875, the following year, debating a proposed bill which banned the exclusion of women from medical schools. The divisions and the conflict is there in the minutes of the General Medical Council, which we looked up, and the conclusions have not stood the test of time. For, while willing to take a position, not to take a position of opposition, the General Medical Council felt the need to register a concern about the capacity of women to study and practice medicine and surgery. And I'll just read you the quote. The Medical Council are of the opinion that the study and practice of medicine and surgery, instead of affording a field of exertion well fitted to women, do, on the contrary, present special difficulties which cannot safely be disregarded. The Council are not prepared to say the women ought to be excluded from the profession. There is more in the archives. We also have a list of the governing bodies and lecturers at the London School of Medicine for Women in the 1870s, and it is notable that the list is made up of a number of lecturers who are based at the Westminster Hospital, and they gave of their time to support women in training to be doctors. For those individuals from the institution we are commemorating today to align themselves so publicly to the London School of Medicine for Women shows much of their leadership, and it contributed towards the progress of women gaining access to the education that had been denied to them. Indeed, Frances Anstey, a lecturer at the Westminster Medical School, was a founding member and the first dean of the London School of Medicine for Women. Now that takes guts when the majority of your peers are against you. But the history of women in medicine by Steve Laws sadly also records that women were not actually admitted to the Westminster Medical School until 1916, and even then it was rescinded from 1928 until after the Second World War. I don't know why, but that is, I'm sure, the subject of a PhD or something like that. So the Westminster Medical School, like the General Medical Council, was torn divided, and there were strong opinions on all sides. I can't think why that reminds me of something that's going on in Westminster of current issues today. That is where the role of leadership is so critical, doing the right thing, not the popular thing. I know you cannot please all the people all of the time, and you need to be willing to be bold and sometimes make unpopular decisions. Now, for those of you who are wondering what happened to the Edinburgh Seven, 4 of them eventually became doctors, and this year, 150 years later, Edinburgh University is awarding all of them honorary degrees. So what of my leadership journey? I attended my interview at the Westminster Hospital to become a registrar in orthopaedic surgery in the spring of 1981. I want you to picture the scene. Green baize table, 4 men in suits, a lady in the corner taking notes. Questions on previous experience, procedures and dealing with complications. And then the last question came from the chairman. And I'm sure he wouldn't mind my telling this story because I heard him tell it. He asked, "Are you going to be strong enough to do orthopedics?" Because, he said, as I get older, I get tired. And I quite like a young chap to hold the leg for me. Well, I said, I'm quite strong, and I expect, as I get older, I'll want a young chap to hold the leg for me too. The job was mine. Sadly, he's dead now, but over the years, I learnt so much from him and so many others. When I made my first bad mistake, cementing the wrong size prosthesis, David Evans, came into the theatre, looked onto the operating table, and then calmly ordered tea from the superintendent theatre sister, who is here today. The instruments were sterilised. We returned to theatre. He then adeptly took a single blow, removed the prosthesis, and slotted in the correct size of prosthesis with a satisfactory flourish. And turning to us all, he said, "Do you know how I knew how to do that?" We stood in marvel and wonderment at his skill. And then he said, "I knew how to do that because I've done it too. And you will never make that mistake again." And I didn't. I have many, many fond memories of my Westminster years, framed by the people, the support, and fun of some of them who are here today. And so I'd like to take this opportunity to say a big thank you to you all. I learnt so much from you. You have mentored me, supported me, and enriched my life in the years since. You know who you are, and so thank you to you all. As I moved from a trainee to a consultant, first at St Mary's and then after my marriage to Ipswich, I progressively took on leadership roles: clinical director, chair of the medical staff committee, BMA local negotiating chair, then training bodies, the SAC, professional bodies, president of the British Orthopaedic Association, and then, as you've heard, president of the Royal College of Surgeons. Being a trainee in our system got us used to change, got you used to taking on leadership roles, but it was an osmotic process. And it wasn't until years later that I started to realize there was a wealth of evidence around the benefits of actually training for leadership and change. And moreover, emerging evidence of the benefit of good leadership, not only for patients, but probably more importantly, for the people with whom we work. We hear so much about poor morale and burnout. This has become an increasingly important issue in the service today. I'm a passionate believer in the importance of clinical leadership to good outcomes, both for patients and for doctors. None of you, I hope, will need convincing that strong clinical leadership is good for patient care, but I want to briefly highlight the evidence that effective clinical leadership has on staff benefits. The work from the Mayo Clinic in 2015 shows that better medical leadership resulted in decreasing likelihood of burnout and a very marked increase in satisfaction for the team with whom one worked. These scores were linked to what could be called magic conversations, so great were their benefits. Interesting enough, these magic conversations were those between colleagues, where clinicians had development conversations and inspired people to do their best, where they empowered people to do their job better and treated them with dignity. As chair of the General Medical Council, I want to bring a renewed focus for the medical profession on the importance of promoting and supporting clinical leadership like that. In the face of the challenges to the existence of our health service, we can't just throw up our hands and continue to complain about our lot. To be part of the medical profession is a tremendous privilege, and the profession has a proud tradition of going above and beyond to help those in need. We need to continue to honour that, to roll up our sleeves and find ways of solving today's challenges. So a problem-solving, can-do mindset is key. Over my career, I found myself asking, why do we expect medical leaders to be born rather than investing in them and in their training? And perhaps a second question, why are some people sometimes so unpleasant to each other? Critical for me today in addressing today's challenge is investing more attention, more time and more resource in building the clinical leaders for today and tomorrow. In the same way as we train for other skills, we need to develop clinical leaders with the skills, training and support so that they can lead the profession to make the change possible for the benefit of our patients and citizens. Both as a doctor and as an associate medical director, I've experienced firsthand the fundamental difference that well-led clinical environments make to the quality of care, where clinicians are supported to become and to remain good doctors, where unprofessional behaviours are challenged and changed, and where doctors are encouraged to be leaders. Patient safety is better. So what does good clinical leadership look like? Well, one of the biggest changes in our society is that the age of deference no longer exists. Clinician leaders can't rely on hierarchy to have influence. It will be about connectivity and engagement, and about networks and sense-making. They will also need to be able to anticipate the issues which modern technologies and new treatment modalities will bring. They need to understand the consequences of the changing public perceptions of the profession and the advice we give. Understand that to be happy to work across the social systems and the impact of health, and all that will make a difference. Be prepared for the impact of political changes, of which there are far too many, and the alternative realities and challenges that they bring. And lastly, be ready to interpret and address opportunities as they present. And how does the General Medical Council fit this scene? Well, our oversight role in medical education and training is vital in helping to shape the type of doctors we are training now and who will be the clinical leaders for the future. Leadership is at every stage, so for both undergraduate and postgraduate education and training, the framework standards we have set have a new and enhanced emphasis on leadership. I have been very pleasantly surprised by joining the GMC. It is an organisation which is keen to learn the lessons from its past, an organisation which sees the value of working with the profession and its partners on issues like clinical leadership, which promote patient safety. It is an organisation of incredible depth and breadth of knowledge, and is there to support the profession and its work. I know the best way of protecting the public and promoting patient safety is about enabling doctors to deliver great care. Vitally important is strengthening our relationship with the public and the profession. We need to resolve some of the problems that have the potential to erode public confidence in the profession. There is an understandable frustration and even anger when repeated public reports demonstrate failure to learn from the lessons of how many people knew of but felt unable to tackle poor behaviour that affects the patient's care. As part of our strategy of improving harm prevention, the patient care, that we have started a new pilot, and we will help to give doctors the skills and confidence to tackle unprofessional behaviours that affect patient safety and outcomes. All the evidence shows that unprofessional behaviour, such as bullying and undermining, has a direct impact on the safe care of patients, as well as contributing to the difficult working environments for doctors and other healthcare professionals. There was one study published recently where 14% of doctors and nurses reported being aware of a specific adverse event being related to an episode of disruptive behaviour from a colleague. Now, if this level of harm was as a result of something like a prescribing error or a surgical mishap, you can just imagine the focus, resource, and energy that would already have been ploughed into education and training to improve the system. I strongly believe the best way to protect the public is to have well-educated, well-supported doctors who work in supportive and supporting environments. It's high time we equip doctors with the means to lead and challenge the behaviours that are detrimental to their efforts and to patient safety. Leadership is at the core of my story. Over the centuries, people here at the Westminster Hospital have been brave and used their energies to enable change and create leaders. It was a privilege to work at the Westminster and to be one of its alumni. If I may go back to Mary Follett, leadership is not defined by the exercise of power, but by the capacity to increase the sense of power amongst those led. The most essential work of the leader is to create more leaders. The Westminster has certainly done that, and that is why, in part, we are here to celebrate 300 years with such pleasure. Thank you for doing me the honour of asking me to address you this afternoon, and I join with you in celebrating heritage and future of the Westminster Hospital. Thank you.
Just going to have a couple of questions. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that was magnificent. And Dame Claire is now going to take just a few questions. So I wonder if we could have any questions from the audience.
I've stunned them into silence.
Yes.
So
Claire, could I just ask, you at the College of Surgeons, or is there someone? Yes. Oh, here we are.
Hi, sorry.
Microphone.
I'm Peter Bartow, 1979, GP in Birmingham. We all know the current manpower crisis, shall we say, within the profession. And I must say that some of us are just really relieved to have retired. That includes me. Having said that, how can we bring that zest back into medicine? My son is thankfully going to be a consultant in Manchester, and he seems to be full of verve and enthusiasm. And I think the lecture that you gave would be of great interest to him. Having said that, I'm not too sure that there are many doctors nowadays who would actually want to be leaders, shall I say, when we can see all these new changes within medicine and the NHS. What's your opinion on that, please? Thank you.
Well, thank you, and congratulations to your son, and I hope he will continue to enjoy it. My answer, in part, is that we have a duty. We are a profession, a very noble profession, and as a profession, we're trusted with the care of people who are sick. So we have a duty to give of our best, and we have a duty to step up to the mark and lend our problem-solving abilities, our leadership skills, which took us to medical school, to the challenge of providing healthcare in this country. We are so lucky in this country to have a system of healthcare that is free at the point of delivery. And I, for many, want to see that continue. Nothing will not change. I mean, change is an inevitable part of our society. If you think about the doubling time of the knowledge that we have, this has changed out of all recognition. And so the only way to adapt to the challenges of what we see in front of us is to change, and we need the profession to lead that change, because otherwise someone else will, and we won't enjoy that. We've had that experience before. So if your son would like to come and talk to me about his leadership journey, I'd be seriously more than happy to talk to him. My email was up there, but anyway, it's chair@GMC, and it is an absolute pleasure to be able to talk to the next generation and try and encourage them to be part of this. So please wish him well. Thank you.
One question here.
Claire, thank you very much. Can I ask a question about gender applications to medical school? To my amazement recently, I found out that of the genders that apply to medical school, two main genders I may refer to, 57% were ladies, women, and 43% were boys. And it looks as if the boys no longer want to do medicine. I think that's been the case for some time. The other shock I really had when I was looking into these figures was that just under half of the people that apply for medical school now get accepted. So that it looks to me as if medical school application is getting much less of an issue than it was. It's much less popular to go to medical school than it was. Thank you very much.
So, Marion, you and I will never agree on the ability to have more women as doctors, because you come from a generation where it was not normal. But I would say to you that actually it is a much more balanced profession now, where 50% of the women who are on the GMC's register, or just under 50% of women, 48% actually, at the moment. I think that's the balance, and that's the population we serve. Interesting enough, of course, it's all about denominators. If you double the number of medical school places, then maybe you halve the number of people who seem to be applying for every place in medicine. We have gone from 3,500 to, I think, 7,500 medical school places. There are another 1,500 places in the pipeline. So I don't think that medicine is any less popular. It's still highly competitive. Jonathan, how many people apply for every one of your medical school places? Probably 10 to 1, 11 to 1, something like that. So the premier institutions, such as Imperial, are still seeing these extraordinarily high levels of application. And the people come from all sectors. And I know that Imperial have made great efforts to make sure that that is the case, with their access to medicine courses for people who are not coming from the typical school profile that sends people to medical school. And I really commend you for doing that, because we do need to see a real balance in the medical fraternity. And maybe I should call it sorority rather than fraternity. I don't know. So I think it's really interesting. I think it's an argument we should just leave on one side. It will even itself out in time. I think people spend far too much time trying to decide whether there are too many or too few. What we know is that we want the best people to apply for medicine. We want the people who are committed to caring for the patients, and we want the people who are the best enabled to deliver that care. And that's what we want, and that is what I think the medical schools are committed to doing. And if they happen to be women, well, then that's great.
Perhaps just one more?
Just one.
Perhaps just one more? Christopher?
There's one there.
Do you think you could talk a little about the wastage after qualifying?
Because I understand a lot of people go abroad and some get do other things, to put it that way, that are not returning to medicine. Would the GMC consider having a 5-year compulsory duty to work in the NHS after they qualify?
So the first thing is that that's a really interesting question, because there are some misunderstandings. We've just done a study which shows that of the people who leave after foundation to go off to do other things, within 3 years, 85% of them are back in the health service. So it's not quite what it seems. The GMC does not provide terms and conditions for doctors, and it would be for the NHS or indeed the government. And at a time when medical students are paying for their own education, you might say, oh, I mean, they don't cover all the fees by any means, but you might say that it would be difficult to then commit them to spending any time in a what you call a service, a condemned service role. And what would happen if I had a baby anyway? You know? So I couldn't be able to work then. So it is an interesting question. I think the real way that we are going to help people to be retained within the profession is to make it possible for them to work in the profession. And the society that we have at the moment is making it quite difficult for young people with families to be in 2 different places, if they've got children, to get childcare. And although there are a lot of options for part-time working and so on, it is incredibly expensive to get childcare. At the moment, if you want to have some help for a child, you end up spending an entire salary just on looking after that child. So I do think we have to make it much easier for the people in the system, men and women, to be able to work together, to have fulfilling careers, to be able to order their childcare, and to have the mentorship and the clinical development that we were lucky enough to have. You know, I had great mentors who cared about my career, who kept in touch with me, and I just don't see that happening in the same way now. So I think if we really want to encourage people not to leave the system or to come back when they've been out for some wonderful life experiences in Australia or New Zealand or where it is, we have to keep in touch with them, we have to make them feel valued, and we have to make them feel that we, the profession, really, really care about them being one of us, and that we want to make their lives worthwhile. So I think, again, we have it in our own power to do something about this. And I don't think you'll be seeing compulsory 5 years anytime soon.
And Claire, could I just take you back to your time at the College of Surgeons? Because you led a fairly major reconstruction of the college in Lincoln's Inn Fields. And how's it going?
So for those of you who don't know, we had 2 buildings in Lincoln's Inn Fields. Now we have 1 building and a building site. And it is rising phoenix-like out of the ashes. And in a couple of years, you will see behind the wonderful portico of the college, the original college portico, you will see a new building, which I hope will be fit to take the surgeons in England into the 22nd century. So,
thank you.
Sorry.
Claire, thank you so much for all your help. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Harold Ellis is a delight. A superb technical surgeon and a careful clinical opinion. However, his greatest attribute is that he is an outstanding and the most stimulating teacher. Throughout his long surgical career, he has written profusely. His books on anatomy, surgery, and surgical history are as readable informative and interesting as any textbook could be, more so in Harold's hands. They are written not only for the junior surgeon, but for the anaesthetist and the nurse. Over the years, Harold has been the greatest friend to all Westminster alumni. And he is also very funny. And so, carry on, Harold. We all love to hear you. Thanks. Thank you, Harold.
After that introduction, I can hardly wait to hear myself speak. Paul, that was very kind of you to say those kind things. I met Paul first when he attended my famous Monday afternoons at 5 o'clock, Meet on St Mark Ward, FRCS classes, and of course, you got through first time. Congratulations. It's very kind of you to ask me to give a vote of thanks to our speaker. A remarkable presentation. I'm so glad that you talked about the history of women in medicine and the struggle they've had until the present time. And you'll be delighted to hear that the last entry of 450 medical students coming up to the Department of Anatomy at Guy's, at the beginning of the academic year, 75% of them were women. And if you look around the dissecting room, 80% of the students there are women, because the men haven't got up yet. We've really heard a remarkable presentation today. It was a lovely talk. Most interesting about the GMC, most interesting about the struggle for women, and most interesting about the present situation. We've really enjoyed ourselves. And I can tell you one thing, the General Medical Council is in safe hands with yourself, Lady Claire. Thank you very much indeed for speaking for us.
So I'm Martin Lupton. I'm head of the current medical school here at Imperial College, and I want to welcome you all on behalf of Imperial College and of the medical school. But I want to thank Professor Ellis for his words, and then I want to thank a number of people. Before I do, I want you to just bear with me as I say a few words myself. So I think I'm one of the few people who do not turn Thought for the Day off when it comes up in the Today program, and I'm always glad I don't, because it helps me think about things I'm going to tell the students. And the other day, I heard the chief rabbi tell a great story about a young man who was walking down, it could have been a young woman, sorry, a young person, walking down a road towards a crossroads. And he reached the crossroads, and unfortunately, the sign had been broken. And he thought to himself, how am I going to get to where I want to get to? Because I don't know where I'm going. And then he thought to himself, well, if I look back down the road where I've come from, I can put my signpost up, I can point it in the direction of where I've come from, and then I will know where I'm going to. Now, it's in that spirit that we as a medical school see our history. We look at our history and we think that helps us understand where we need to go. And it's not just the faculty that feel that, it's our students. They have a very, very strong feeling of connection with their history. So they feel viscerally connected to all of you and to the schools that made us up as Imperial College School of Medicine. So in this spirit of family, I think we're all an extended family, I want to thank those people that made this happen. And they are, in particular, no particular order. So Christopher Everett, thank you very much. Paul Acroft, Terry Brightmore, Mary Neeland, Margaret Pollock, and Diana Werry. Without them, this would not have happened. So I just want to say thank you. And then we'd like to invite you, as members of the family, for a drink. So if you'd like to move your way through there, there's drinks and things available, and we'd all like to chat. Thank you very much.